While I am optimistic about the Browns' upcoming season, I think I personally would be doing myself and you a disservice if I didn't entertain the possibility that this could all go wrong. So what I want to do today is to put my optimism aside and talk about what on the Browns could go wrong in 2020. So let's talk about it. Real quick before this video starts, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ding that notification bell so you can be notified. This helps grow the channel, and it also makes sure that you're locked in when we get more and more football content. And as all these things start up again, you're going to want to have some content, and make sure you're subscribed so you can be notified when that content drops. Now back to the video. So while it does seem like the Browns have done a much better job patching the holes in the organization and in the roster this offseason than they did last year, if there's one thing that Browns fans have been forced to learn against their will, is that no matter how good something looks, it can go bad. No matter how guaranteed something looks in Cleveland sports, something can go wrong, something can go bad. So looking at the Browns roster, and while it is easy to get carried away with the optimism just by looking at the names that are on top of this depth chart, I mean, it looks great for wide receivers, it looks great for running back, offensive line, all this stuff looks great. But all that aside, there are still a healthy amount of question marks on the offensive side of the ball. And while the offensive side of the ball has less questions than the defensive side of the ball, I would argue that the question marks on the offensive side of the ball are much more important to the success of the team. And that question mark is... Now, Baker Mayfield has been an interesting guy. At this time last year, he was one of the guys primed to become one of the faces of the NFL. I mean, they had Tom Brady literally hand Baker Mayfield his rings, like in a passing the torch moment in an official NFL commercial. He got that big progressive deal. He got all those sponsorships because people were anticipating that Baker Mayfield was going to be one of the faces of the NFL. Not unlike what we see with Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, but even more so because they jumped on that bandwagon with Baker Mayfield much faster than they did with Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. But now Baker Mayfield finds himself fighting not to lose himself in this sea of obscurity and mediocrity that, quite frankly, somebody like a Jared Goff has lost himself in. And with Baker Mayfield, you have to understand that he had one really good season and one really bad season. That's the definition of 50-50. So any kind of bold proclamation in one way or the other about Baker Mayfield and his future success in the terms of saying it as if it's absolute is kind of baseless and just kind of sports theater at this point, because we just don't know what Baker Mayfield is. We know on one hand how good Baker Mayfield can be. We also know on another hand how bad he can be. And at the end of the day, we're kind of projecting because the things we don't know about Baker Mayfield are the most important things. We don't know how consistent he can be. And more importantly, where on the spectrum of level of play does Baker Mayfield fall in his consistency? Is he just an average quarterback? Is he a starting level guy? Is he a below average guy? Is he going to be a top level guy? Or is he going to be a guy like Matt Stafford who kind of just hangs out in the middle there? We don't know that about Baker Mayfield. Nobody knows that about Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield doesn't even know that about Baker Mayfield. We're hoping, we're projecting, we're trying to make some hypothesis, but at the end of the day, we have no clue. And the reason we have no clue is because there are huge questions about Baker Mayfield. First things first, the interceptions. They have to go down. And you can't just point at the interceptions as a problem last year. They were kind of a problem the year before, especially in his first 8 games of that season before the switcheroo happened at head coach. So the interceptions are a problem. Accuracy drop. He dropped his accuracy significantly from last year, from the year before. Now, there are reasons behind that. There's a great video by Brett Coleman that describes some of the issues that Baker Mayfield had and why his accuracy dropped so much in this offense that he was in last year. But again, we got to make sure that that theory is fact and not just theory anymore, right? We got to put that to the test. And with Kevin Stefanski's offense, you're at least going to put that theory to test. Pocket mechanics. He had great pocket mechanics his first year. He had great instincts. He had great footwork. But then somewhere in between 2018 and 2019, it went bad. Even in his first game against Tennessee, you could tell he wasn't comfortable. You could tell he wasn't confident in his feet. And speaking of confidence, that's another question mark about Baker Mayfield. With how bad last year went, with how much people are dogging him, and with how far he has fallen in the eyes of future stars in this league, is his confidence still there? Is that trademark confidence that made him so marketable, that made him so lovable, and made him so good in 2018? Is that still there? Does that still have a place in Baker Mayfield's future? We don't know, and these are all important things to Baker Mayfield's game. And while, yes, there are a ton of very important questions that need to be answered about Baker Mayfield, and a lot of areas where you can see this goes wrong with Baker Mayfield if he does not improve and play better than he did last year, you can see where this team can struggle. I don't think he's the only uncertain thing on this team, because I think there's another aspect of this team that deserves some heavy scrutiny. Now, I'll say this first. I like the Kevin Stefanski hire. I like what I've seen from Kevin Stefanski in a very limited 2020 offseason. But this is Kevin Stefanski's first year as a head coach ever. And he's going to have to handle working around one of the most unprecedented situations in recent memory, especially in recent sports memory. There's been nothing like this that you would have to work around in the way that Kevin Stefanski is going to have to work around this. And again, this is his first year as a head coach. It's a hell of a way to break somebody in. And while I do believe that Kevin Stefanski is as up to the task as any one person can be, I do question, one, if one person can be up to a task that's just so massive at the end of the day in their first year. And also, I question if he has the necessary experience on staff that will be able to support him in his first year, and in this first year being so weird. To explain some of my concerns about how he's going to handle this situation that we're in, well, we know that due to how this is going to go down and the uncertainty of everything, this is going to have an effect on the coaches a ton, because now they're being asked to do a little bit more, but also they have no idea what the circumstances are going to be, what the restrictions are going to be, what are they going to be allowed to do to prepare, what is the structure that they're going to be allowed to do this in, how many practices. They have no idea what the protocols are for this unprecedented situation. And as camp starts to begin in like 2 days, they have no clue. The NFL has not given down anything. I guess we're operating as normal, but this can't be anything but a stressful situation for any head coach, quite frankly, but especially a first-year head coach who's just trying to get down his plan to begin with. Now he has to deal with all of these kind of complications in the way. Then on top of all of that, we can't forget that this team was poorly coached last year. So there are a lot of things that Kevin Stefanski is going to be able to have to fix in order to get polish on this thing that he's trying to build in 2020. So the penalties, he's going to have to fix that. The structure of the offense, he's going to have to fix that. Baker Mayfield's role, he's going to have to fix that. Nick Chubb's role, he's going to have to fix that. He's going to have to fix the protections. He's going to have to fix a ton of stuff. And again, he doesn't have a ton of time, but more importantly, he doesn't even know the structure in which he's going to be allowed to try to do some of this work. And then on the other end, when you look at his support, there's just not a ton of NFL head coaching experience. There's more than enough NFL experience, and that was one of my main gripes with the coaching staff last year, was that there was just a lack of NFL experience within the entire coaching staff. This year, that's not necessarily the problem. There's just a lack of head coaching experience. And I know they have Bill Callahan, the former head coach of the Raiders, and I think he stepped in for Washington at the end of last season. So he's there, but he's not necessarily the best option that you would want as far as having head coach experience on your roster, because this is not a guy who's well regarded as a head coach and well liked by any of his former players. Despite him making a Super Bowl in Oakland, he's not liked by anybody that was on that team. You can read interviews and dig into that if you need to, but the gist of it is that he's not well liked. Even by like Jerry Rice, who doesn't really say anything bad about most people, he's not liked. So that's concerning that that's going to be the point of reference that Kevin Stefanski is going to have as far as asking for advice for head coaching related things. I do worry about that. I do worry if they could have went the extra mile and maybe paid some extra money to get Gary Kubiak involved in some way. Have somebody who has a better track record as a head coach. Have somebody who just has that better experience at that level. I don't mind Bill Callahan as an offensive line coach, but when he's going to be the point of reference as far as former head coaching experience goes in that building, I do start to get concerned on how that's going to have an effect on Kevin Stefanski. But coaching is one thing. The quarterback is another thing. But the thing I think I've talked about the most during this offseason that I'm worried about is what Browns fans saw from this team in this front seven in the last 6 games of the season without Myles Garrett should be absolutely alarming when it comes to the downside of this team's defense. Because outside of Myles Garrett getting re-signed and getting his long-term deal, understand that front seven that was terrible without Myles Garrett last season is pretty much back, except for they lost a couple of key pieces. There's been no real significant upgrades. Yeah, you've added Adrian Claiborne, who's going to be a nice piece to rotate in there as far as depth goes. You added Andrew Billings, who might be able to rotate in there with Larry Ogunjobi and Joby, but at the end of the day, it's the same front seven. It's still Ogunjobi starting. It's still Sheldon Richardson starting. It's still Olivier Vernon, except for you lost Schobert at the linebacker position and kind of Christian Kirksey, but he wasn't healthy all last season, and especially during that 6-game stretch where they didn't have Myles Garrett. So it's impossible to know what he would have had a factor in. But you're returning the same thing, except for you don't have Joe Schobert. And what you had with that front seven outside of Myles Garrett just turned out to be embarrassingly not enough. Just go back and look at some of the rushing totals that teams put up against the Browns in that time period, and it's quite frankly, it's embarrassing. And I find it hard to be optimistic about this front seven outside of Myles Garrett because, again, you're returning the supporting 6 group that was very underwhelming last year, and you're just returning them again with some pieces that are honestly getting to an age where they're starting to get old, and Sheldon Richardson and Olivier Vernon, and then you lose Joe Schobert and you replace them with B.J. Goodson, which is like, I don't know. Like, I wasn't a fan of re-signing Joe Schobert, but if B.J. Goodson's the solution, then, man, I think they could have done better at that part of it. And I don't know how I, as a Browns fan or somebody who talks about the Browns or covers the Browns, however you see me, am supposed to advocate that this front seven is going to make any kind of leap or be any better than they were last year when there hasn't been any significant changes that would support that. Again, Myles Garrett can go Superman, and that could end up being the difference, but I just don't have faith in his supporting cast. Sure, there's the possibility that Olivier Vernon stays healthy and returns to Pro Bowl form, but he's 30 years old, coming off of injuries, and this is a guy who doesn't have a small injury history, has a large sheet of injuries, so I just don't see it likely that this is the injury that he comes off of, stays healthy, and plays well in. I just don't see that. This is a guy who was injury-prone in New York and in Miami. Why wouldn't that continue in Cleveland? Larry Ogunjobi, he can finally make that jump, but we've been waiting for Larry Ogunjobi to make that jump for the last 2 years, and at this point, I think it's just booked that Larry Ogunjobi is not that guy. He's not going to be a 3-down defensive tackle. He is going to be a guy who is very useful in a rotation, but not somebody you can have on every down. And maybe Mack Wilson breaks out and has like a Darius Leonard type year, but I think while it's realistic to think he's going to have a good year and a much better year than he had last year, I don't think it's realistic to expect him to play that much better with a loss of a lot of the veteran leadership around him. I just don't think that's a realistic thing to ask of Mack Wilson, and I don't think it's fair to evaluate him on that basis. So, again, nothing about this front seven, not named Myles Garrett, makes me feel confident at all. And that worries me because this defense is going to have to stop the run at least 6 times in this season. On top of, they play Dallas this year, they play Tennessee again. They're going to play all of these run-heavy teams. A lot of their success in defense is going to be dependent on their ability to stop the run. And outside of Myles Garrett, I don't have confidence that they can really do that. And again, when you're in a division where the worst running offense by far, quite frankly, is Pittsburgh with James Conner, that's a massive problem to have. And if that's not patched, if something's not done, or if Myles Garrett is not amazing this year, that can be a problem that can be exploited really bad on the Browns. Quite frankly, I'm not saying it's one of the worst front sevens in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that there are some holes in this front seven that do keep me up at night. And I hope keep Joe Woods up at night, because I hope he's figuring out a way to patch it. And maybe, hopefully, my concerns about the front seven are unfounded at the season. But I have some concerns. I have some significant concerns about this front seven, especially if Myles Garrett can't perform above or at defensive player of the year level. I worry about the pieces around it, simply because they underproduced so much the year before. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What are you most worried about ruining this season this year? Last year it was the offensive line. What are you worried about ruining this season? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching, and have a great day. Have a good night.